Lesson 2 is called IT Service Management and IT Infrastructure Library Key Concepts, and it has 4 main objectives. First, we'll lay some vocabulary groundwork by defining some roles and service management related terms. Next, we'll define what a process is, and we'll define some process-related roles as well. Third, we'll learn the difference between 3 commonly used constructs in ITIL: roles, functions, and processes. And we'll wrap up this lesson with a helpful model for assigning roles and responsibilities called the RACI model. Many organizations value ITIL because of its standardized vocabulary, so let's introduce some key players in ITIL. First, we have our customer. A customer is someone who buys goods or services. In the everyday world, if you need a new pair of shoes, you go to the shoe store and you buy new shoes. You hand someone money, and in return you get the goods you were looking for, which in this case are shoes. Or, if you're hungry and you don't feel like cooking, you go to a restaurant. You pay someone money, and in return you get a well-prepared meal, and you don't have to do the dishes. The restaurant has provided the service for you. So the customer has the money, and they are requesting and paying for the goods or services. The service provider is the person or organization who provides those goods or services in exchange for money. The shoe salesperson, the restaurant, they are both service providers. Let's apply these terms to the business world. If you are the head of your company's marketing department and your marketing folks need the ability to print in color, you'll ask IT if there's any color printers in the building. If there aren't, the IT department will procure the right type of color printer and get it set up. But chances are the marketing department is going to pay for that printer. The head of the marketing department in this instance is the customer because they have the budget to pay for a new printer. And IT is the service provider. They're going to be providing the service of color printing. A supplier is any third party who provides goods or services that are required to deliver IT services. Now, chances are the IT department didn't manufacture the color printer in their back room. They purchased it from Harry's House of Hardware. Harry's House of Hardware is the company who provided the goods to the IT department. Suppliers can also provide services. For example, your company may use Harry's House of Data Circuits to lease the frame circuits which connect your company to the internet. Lastly, we have our users. The user is the everyday end user of a service. Sally in marketing, Jen the bank teller, Frank in accounting, Matt in human resources. These are the folks who use the IT services every day. We'll use these words throughout the rest of this video mentor, so if you need to take a moment to pause this recording to commit these to memory, feel free to do so. If you think about it, ITIL is simply a framework of IT service management best practices. So if ITIL is all about IT service management, we need to know what a service is before we can do anything else. The official ITIL definition of a service is: services are a means of delivering value to customers by facilitating the outcomes customers want to achieve without the ownership of specific costs and risks. Now, while you don't need to memorize this definition word for the exam, you should be able to see this sentence and know that it's the definition of a service. But what does this sentence really mean? Well, let's pick out the important words in this definition. Services are a means of delivering value to customers. Well, if something is valuable, it's something that's positive, something that you want, or something that costs roughly what you're willing to pay for it. So services are a means of delivering value to customers by facilitating the outcomes customers want to achieve. The outcomes are simply the end result that the customer is seeking, the output, the finished product. So let's go back. Services are a means of delivering value to customers by facilitating the outcomes customers want to achieve without the ownership of specific costs and risks. This means that the customers don't want to deal with the costs and risks associated with getting that outcome. They just want the outcome handed to them in exchange for money. So let's put this into perspective. Pretend your hair is getting a little shaggy and you need a haircut. You're going to go to Harry's House of Haircuts and you're going to pay the salon $15 for their cheapy haircut special. The outcome you're seeking is shorter hair that looks good. You will consider that your haircut is a good value if it's under 20 bucks and if you get a decent haircut. It won't be a good value if it's under 20 bucks but you wind up looking like Frankenstein. Now when you sit down in that chair and they wrap that drape around your shoulders, what do they do for you? Well, they cut your hair. They don't hand you some clippers and a manual, right? Of course not. Now, why didn't you give yourself a haircut? Because you didn't want to own the costs of buying fancy clippers and going to haircutting school, and you didn't want to own the risks of possibly cutting off your ear with the sharp scissors. So they provide the service of a haircut, and you provide the cash. Or, as the late Professor Theodore Levitt from Harvard Business School once said, people want a quarter-inch hole. They don't want a quarter-inch drill. They want the outcome. They want the end result. They don't want the hassle of finding the right drill bit and having to measure things. So let's apply this to IT. We are IT. Our customers are the various heads of the lines of business that IT supports. Our customers want a specific service, like email, which supports the outcome of fast and reliable written communication. These customers, or lines of business heads, they don't want to be bothered by running the hardware, maintaining software, and making sure there's enough capacity on the network. They just want to be able to send an email to jill@nap-it.com and have it reach its destination. Now that we know what a service is, we can now begin to understand what service management is. The official ITIL definition of service management reads, service management is a set of specialized organizational capabilities for providing value to customers in the form of services. You'll need to know this definition for the exam. Now let's break it down. Service management is a set of specialized organizational capabilities. Specialized organizational capabilities are things your organization is really good at for providing value to customers in the form of services. Now let's look below. Service management aims to achieve common understanding between the customer and the service provider through managing service level expectations and delivering and supporting desired results. This means that service management is a two-way street because we have to have a common understanding between two parties of what's actually going to be delivered. And then, if we promise to deliver something, well then gosh darn it, we better deliver it. For example, if you go to Harry's House of Haircuts and you make an appointment to get the $15 cheapie haircut special, and you pay your $15 and they cut your hair just the way you like it, do you have any right to be upset that you didn't get a massage and a manicure too? No, of course not. Why? Because you didn't sign up for a massage and a manicure. You only signed up for the cheapie haircut. We can also apply this to the business world. If the payroll department has agreed that all employees will get paid on the 15th and the 30th of each month, employees don't have the right to be angry when they didn't get paid on the 12th. Or, if the IT department has agreed to provide the business with email capabilities from midnight to 10 p.m. every day, with backups occurring every night between 10 and midnight, the business has no right to be upset when they can't access their email at 10:15 p.m. So service management is all about managing the services that the service provider provides to customers and ensuring that the customers know what to expect. If the customer's needs change, then they have two choices. They can either ask the service provider to change the service they provide so it meets the new needs of the business, or the customer can choose a different service provider altogether. All businesses provide services to their customers. For example, banks provide services to their customers, such as mortgages, checking accounts, savings accounts, and personal loans. So in this model here, let's pretend that business service A represents mortgages that a bank might provide. Now, in order for a bank to provide a customer a mortgage, it has its own business processes that it has to follow. If we pretend that my mom, for example, needs a mortgage, she'll go to a bank. And the bank will probably do some internal processes to make sure that my mom is worthy of a mortgage. The first thing that they'll probably do is run a credit check on her. And next, they'll probably do an appraisal of her current house. And lastly, if business processes 1 and 2 went okay, they'll assign her a customer account number. Now let's pretend that this bank has been around for a very long time, say 150 years. 150 years ago, could this bank offer mortgages? Yes. Could they do a credit check on my mom? Yes, absolutely. They would jump on their horse and check with local merchants to make sure that my mom paid her bills on time. Could they do an appraisal on her current house? Absolutely. They could ride over to her house and check the place out. Could they assign my mom an account number? Yes, indeed. Back at the bank, they had a giant ledger book, and they'd write my mom's information down with a quill pen, and they'd keep track of her payments that way. Fast forward to today, where IT exists. Why does IT exist? Because it's fun? Nope. IT wouldn't exist without a business to support. IT is simply an enabler of business processes, which means that IT exists simply to make the business processes run faster, more effectively, and to save redundant work. The way IT enables the business is through services. So the business provides services to its customer, like my mom out here who needs a mortgage, and IT provides services to its customer, which in this case is the business or the bank. An example of some services that IT provides to the business could be internet access or the running of a giant customer information database. These two services help make these business processes work better, which in turn helps the bank provide more mortgages to its banking customers. IT services are comprised of IT components: hardware, software, switches, routers, hubs, servers, PCs, and all of these IT components are officially called configuration items. And IT service management is how we manage the services that IT provides to the business, as well as the components that comprise those services. Don't forget that ITIL is simply a framework for outlining IT service management best practices, so this slide shows the scope of ITIL in red. You'll notice that ITIL isn't concerned with the services that the business is providing to its customers out here, and ITIL also isn't particularly interested in how the business processes are created and run. It's up to the business to come up with some business service management system to deal with that stuff on their own. ITIL talks about IT service management, so we care about the IT stuff here in this red circle, as well as where these IT services interface and connect with these business processes. The ITIL books describe 3 different types of service providers from which customers can get services. Here we have a fake company called Gadget Corp Inc., and they make all different types of electronics in their various divisions. This slide shows the television division as well as Gadget Corp's cell phone division. Both of these divisions have their own internal purchasing department that services only those in their respective divisions. If a worker on the manufacturing floor of the television division needs parts, they'll contact the television division's purchasing department. Here, the people on the manufacturing floor are the customers, and the workers in the television division's purchasing department are the service providers. Because they both belong to the same division, we'll call this relationship an internal service provider, or a Type 1 service provider. The same relationship, Type 1 or internal service provider, also applies for the workers in the cell phone division. The second type of service provider is called a shared services unit, which is a type of service provider that provides services to anyone in the company regardless of where they work. Here, human resources or other departments like payroll serve as a shared services unit. All employees of the company are customers, and here the people in human resources are the service provider. The third type of service provider is called an external service provider, which can be any company or entity outside the business that provides services. Harry's House of Java Developers provides Java development services to Gadget Corp and probably to many other companies as well. Think about your own company. Where does IT live? If you work for a very large organization, you may have an IT team that supports just one area of your company. And in that case, you may have many different IT departments, each serving as a Type 1 or an internal service provider. If you work for a medium-sized company, you may have just one IT department that supports everyone in the entire company, making it a Type 2 or a shared services unit. If your organization outsources your IT department to Harry's House of IT Outsourcing, then your IT department is a Type 3 or an external service provider. For the exam, you'll need to know the 3 types of service providers: internal service provider, shared services unit, and external service provider. We're going to change direction for a bit and lay some additional vocabulary groundwork by talking about processes. What is a process? A process is a bundle of logical activities that are combined to achieve a certain goal or a result. Or we can say that it's a set of steps you take to get from A to B, or to turn inputs into outputs. Let's say your stomach is growling and you want a snack. You decide to make some cookies. The input, or the trigger, which is the thing that kicked off this process, is your growling stomach. The process itself contains the activities and steps you'll take to produce cookies. The output will be the cookies that satisfy your hunger. You'll know that your process was successful when you're eating freshly baked cookies that came out well. Processes are very high level and they don't contain very much detail at all. For example, the process for baking cookies is Google the recipe, buy the ingredients, bake the cookies, and eat the cookies. Now you'll notice that I didn't mention anything about how much sugar or flour to include. The reason I make this distinction is because the 5 books of ITIL contain about 24 processes, and these ITIL processes don't get more specific or prescriptive than Google the recipe, buy the ingredients, bake the cookies, eat the cookies. Figuring out how to do these things is up to you, the baker, since ITIL has no idea what kind of kitchen you have, what tools you have at your disposal, even what kind of specific cookies you want, or what your food allergies are. So we can apply this all to the business world. Let's pretend that you're a manager in the marketing department and you have a new employee on your team starting in 2 weeks. You open up a ticket to tell IT that you have a new employee starting, and that kicks off the new employee enablement process, which goes a little like this. Once you submit your ticket, it first goes to the procurement team, who orders a new laptop for that employee because that can take a while. Next, the facilities team will probably find a cubicle for that new employee, and once that's done, the telecom team can make sure that the phone is activated at that location and that their voicemail's set up. The server team then creates a user ID and password and an email account, and the network team activates the network port at their desk. When the laptop arrives from procurement, the desktop team slaps a new image on it and gets it configured, and when the new employee shows up on their first day on the job, the laptop is delivered to them and the employee is ready to go. Each of these steps is handled by people on different teams or in different departments, but they all contribute to the goal or outcome of getting a new employee enabled for their first day. We need a person to write the process and to ensure that this entire process does what it's supposed to do and that all the handoffs between teams and departments work. And this person is called the process owner. The process owner is accountable for the overall success of the process, meaning if the new employee doesn't have everything they need on their first day of work, we need a single person, a single point of accountability to find out where the process broke down and how to get it fixed so it doesn't happen again. If the failed step turned out to be, for example, the desktop team not getting the laptop configured in time, then the process owner would identify that. But the process manager of that individual team, who in this case is probably the supervisor of the desktop team, would fix their portion of the process. Each process manager writes the individual steps that their respective team has to follow to accomplish their portion of this overall process. The process owner has 4 main jobs, which can be abbreviated into the acronym DEMI. So a process owner is responsible for documenting the process, also educating relevant staff on how to use this process, and then periodically checking to ensure that it's being followed correctly. The process owner is also responsible for measuring the process results against the various metrics they've created and agreed to. And then lastly, they're responsible for continually improving the process. For the exam, you'll need to know what a process owner is and what their responsibilities are. If you can remember DEMI, you'll be fine. And the good news is that you will not be asked about process managers for the exam. All processes have the following characteristics, whether they're business processes, IT processes, or processes for baking cookies. The first one is that all processes are measurable. How many cookies did we want? How much money did we spend on the ingredients? How many bad batches did we have before we got a good one? How long did it take the new person in marketing to get their laptop? How many laptops did we give out last year as opposed to the year before? Number 2 is that processes have to have specific results. Saying, we need a computer or we need cookies isn't enough. We have to know what the output is in very specific terms. If the new employee is expecting a laptop but we give them a desktop, did we achieve the intended results? If we wanted peanut butter cookies but baked chocolate chip instead, have we done our job? Every process must deliver its primary results to a customer or a stakeholder, meaning somebody has to care about the output. It's not enough to make cookies or prepare a laptop. We have to know who is receiving these things when they're ready. Lastly, all processes respond to a specific event. They have a trigger. Why am I configuring this laptop? Well, because this new employee needs it. Why am I baking cookies? Because I'm hungry. Or, more realistically, because your kid is just now at 8:30 p.m. telling you about the bake sale tomorrow for which he needs 4 dozen cookies baked. Now, up here we say that all processes must be measurable. But what do we actually measure? Well, down here we'll see that we measure a process's progress, like how well are we adhering to this process? We also measure a process's effectiveness. Is this process delivering the desired outcome or result? Next, we also measure a process's efficiency. Does it accomplish the goal in the smallest amount of steps possible? And lastly, we measure the process's cost effectiveness. Are we wasting money as we execute the process's activities? It's up to the process owner to determine what specifically is going to be measured and how to report on it. Because don't forget, process owners have 4 things for which they're responsible, and those things spell out DEMI. And the M in DEMI is to measure the process. So it's up to the process owner to determine what specifically is going to be measured and how we're going to report on it. Process owners should create KPIs, or key performance indicators, which are tied to CSFs, critical success factors. And we'll talk more about these 2 things when we get to Chapter 6, Continual Service Improvement. In ITIL, we have 3 terms, functions, roles, and processes, that can be a little confusing, so I want to take a moment to explain them a bit. A function is a self-contained unit of an organization that does certain kinds of work. They typically use the same tools, they usually have the same budget, and a good example of a function in ITIL is the service desk. The service desk is a self-contained unit of IT, and their job is to answer the phone or emails from users and address their requests and issues. They typically use the same tool, whether that's Remedy or Heat or CA or whatever tool that it is you're using, and they usually work from the same budget. In ITIL, there are 4 of these functions, and we'll talk about those 4 functions very briefly on the next slide. Next, we have roles. Roles are a set of responsibilities that we assign to a person or a team. Think about roles as the name of the hat that you're wearing when you're executing a process. For example, your name might be Jim Jones, and you might be an accountant by day. You also might be a dad. But you also might be baking cookies at 8:30 at night for your kids. If that's the case, even though your name is Jim Jones and you're an accountant, at that moment at 8:30 at night, you're also a baker. You might not be a professional baker, but at that moment, you're the person who's wielding the spatula. Now let's tie this to business. In ITIL, we have a process called incident management, which is the process we follow to check out Sally's monitor that just went blank and won't turn back on. Now, if your job title is desktop technician, and that's what's written on your business card, you'll be wearing an incident management hat as you look at Sally's machine. 2 minutes later, if you determine that Sally needs to have a new monitor installed, you'll take off your incident management hat and you'll put on a change management hat as you fill out the paperwork to get a new monitor issued and installed. But your business card still says desktop technician. That never changes. It's just what role are you fulfilling in that moment as you execute certain steps in a process. As we learned before, a process is a bundle of logical activities that are combined to achieve a certain goal or result. Or we can say that a process is a set of steps you take to get from A to B, or to turn inputs into outputs. Processes are what gets done. Roles and function are the people or teams who actually get the processes done. So, processes are steps or activities, and roles and functions are humans or teams. As promised, I want to quickly describe the 4 functions that ITIL includes in its books. First, we have the service desk, which is a group of people dedicated to answering calls from end users. Our second function is called IT Operations Management. These are the behind-the-scenes folks who keep the engine running. We have IT Operations Control, which deals with important items, such as making sure the batch jobs ran correctly, that there's paper in the copiers. They possibly sit in an operations bridge or a NOC, and they monitor critical systems. We also have a second team on IT Operations Management called Facilities Management. Facilities Management is the team that babysits and manages data centers, HVAC systems, cooling, raised flooring, cabling, backup generators, things like that. Our third function is technical management, And these folks are the techies or the geeks of your IT organization. Folks like those on your server team, your network admins, your exchange gurus, your desktop folks. The sister to technical management is application management, who are the folks who support the applications your organization uses. Does your organization use SAP? People in the application management function are those who care and feed for SAP and keep it up and running. Does your service desk tool need tweaking? Application management to the rescue. So these folks aren't necessarily the ones who've developed the applications, but they're definitely the people who support the applications. Now I know that was quick, but I promise that we'll talk more about these 4 ITIL functions when we reach Chapter 5 of this video mentor called Service Operation. Did you ever have a team leader say to you, "Hey everyone, I wrote this great process and starting tomorrow we're all going to follow it"? So your team leader hands out copies, and as you look it over, you have absolutely no idea what you are specifically supposed to do. You can see the process goals, you can see the process steps all spelled out for you, but you don't actually know what you are actually on the hook for. So if you are a process owner or a process manager, you can use the RACI model to assign roles and responsibilities for a process or for activities within that process. Here's how it works. Make a grid. Down the side of your grid, write out all of the steps or activities within your process. Across the top, write out the names of the roles that will be executing those steps of the process. And then in your grid, assign an R, A, C, or I to designate who's going to do what. For example, if you have the letter R next to your name, you are the person responsible, personally responsible, for executing that task with your bare hands. Don't delegate it, do it yourself. In the RACI model, you can have as many R's as are necessary to get that job done. But you must have at least one R so we can be sure that somebody is doing the work. If you have an A next to your name, then you are the person accountable for the overall success of that step. This means that someone else is responsible for executing that step, but if they somehow mess it up, it's your neck that's on the line. Using the RACI model, you can only ever have one A per line, and this is to eliminate finger pointing and ambiguity. This way nobody says, "I thought you were going to do it." "No, I thought you were going to do it." When there's only one A per line, there's no question about it. This is the person who's doing it. The letter C stands for consulted. If you have the letter C next to your name, that means that someone will be consulting you or asking you for your opinion, input, or advice about that step. You can have as many or as few C's per line as necessary, and having none is perfectly okay too. The letter I stands for informed. If you have an I next to your name, your only job is to smile and nod. You are the one being informed, not the one doing the informing. Your RACI chart can have as many I's as needed per line, or you might not have any. Now let's apply this. Pretend you live in a 3-story townhouse and you share a wall with your next door neighbor. You have a piano on your first floor, but you think you might want to turn your third floor into a music room. So the first thing you do is you ask one of your friends who has a lot of taste and style if they think that the third floor would look cool as a music room. You're just asking their opinion. So what letter from the RACI model would we apply to this friend? We would give them a C for consulted because we're just bouncing the idea off of them. We're just asking their opinion. Assuming that your friend thinks it's cool and you decide to move forward, you call Harry's House of Piano Moving. Harry is the owner of Harry's House of Piano Moving, and he's been in business for 50 years. Now, Harry isn't moving the pianos himself anymore, but he has a few workers who do all the heavy lifting nowadays. On the day of your appointment, Harry's 2 workers, who are named John and Paul, come over and they start getting your place ready for the move. Before they start moving the piano, though, you knock on your neighbor's door and you let them know that they're about to hear some hocking and clocking coming from your townhouse next door. But not to worry, you're just moving a piano. So what letter do we assign to the neighbor? We give them an I, which stands for informed, because the neighbor is just receiving the information and doesn't have to do anything except smile and nod. Now when you come back to your house, John and Paul are ready to start the move. So what letter are we going to assign John and Paul? We assign them an R, which stands for responsible, because they are the ones who are physically moving the piano up the stairs with their bare hands. Now, John and Paul move the piano up the stairs, but as soon as they get to the top of the 3rd floor, they drop the piano and it comes crashing down to the bottom of the 1st floor, and you're staring in horror at the pile of wood that used to be your piano. So it's time for you to make a phone call to the accountable party. So who do you call? Harry from Harry's House of Piano Moving. But why? Because he is the accountable person. So even though Harry wasn't even there, he's the owner of the company. So he's the one who has to remedy the situation by either calling his insurance company or getting you a new piano, and then improving the piano moving process so this doesn't happen again the next time. Now for the exam, it's important to remember that every activity must have at least one R, or a responsible party. It's also important to remember that there can only be one A, or one accountable person per row, and again, that's to eliminate ambiguity. Also for the exam, you'll need to know what R, A, C, and I each stand for, and how many of each you can have on a RACI chart. You'll also need to know what a RACI chart, or sometimes we call it a RACI model, what we use it for. And what we use it for is to assign roles and responsibilities for a process or for activities within a process. Now, the way that I like to remember that you can only have one person accountable for an activity in a process is that A is the first letter of the alphabet. Lastly, let's introduce one more role, and this is a person called the service owner. Now, we've already talked about process owners, and these two roles are similar. Just like a process owner is accountable for the overall success of their process, the service owner is the role that's accountable for the end-to-end service. If your company's email service goes down for 6 hours, you'll probably have an exchange administrator responsible, with an R, for getting it back up and running. But this service owner will be accountable for the outage and will probably have to explain to the business what happened. If you are the owner of something, whether it's a process or a service, your job is to, number one, be accountable for that thing that you own. So if you're a process owner, you're accountable for your process. And if you're a service owner, you are accountable for the success of your service. And then also, if you own something, your job is to continually improve that thing. So if you're a process owner, your job is to continually improve the process so it's aligned to the needs of the business. And if you are a service owner, one of your responsibilities is to continually improve the service so it's aligned to the needs of the business. So those are some things that owners have in common. It's also important to note that service owners are just as important to service management as process owners are. So we don't want to say that one's more important than the other. They're not. They're both equally important roles. So on the left side of your screen, I wrote out DEMI, D-E-M-I, so you can remember what the responsibilities of process owners are. And here on the left, I listed out the responsibilities of service owners. So we already talked about the first one, that service owners are responsible for continually improving the service so it's aligned to the needs of the business. Next, a service owner is also responsible for representing the service to the business. So if someone on the business side has a question about a specific service and how it's delivered, they'll go to this high-level service owner. A service owner is typically an executive. For example, if you work in a large company, you may have someone in your organization that's called the VP of Messaging. And the VP of Messaging is probably not the person who's rebooting the Exchange box at 2 in the morning. That person's probably going to be one of your Exchange administrators. But your service owner is the VP of Messaging, for example, and it's their job to represent the service to the business. Also, your service owner will typically be the person who signs the SLA on the IT side. So it's important to remember that your service owner is an IT person, and they're going to be one of the 2 signatures on your service level agreements. We'll talk more about service level agreements when we get to the service design chapter of this video mentor.